Okay, now let's suppose uh, we have identified a need. We looked at the market. We found some potential suppliers, and they gave us their proposals. And we compared the proposals, and we have selected one supplier. Okay, we're going to work with this supplier. So what do we do next? The next thing is signing a contract, putting it in writing, making it legal. Okay, and then start working with them, implementing the contract, and after the implementation, to look for continuous improvement. Okay, so how do you write a contract? Now, uh, contracts are basically sales agreements. Every contract has two parties, at least two parties. Okay, and when you sign a contract, it doesn't always have to be in writing and on paper. You can have a written contract, and you can have an oral verbal contract. Okay, and both have their advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so now what are some of the important components of of a contract? uh, Term and termination, indemnification, liability, warranties, title, risk, freight terms, payment terms, force majeure. So let's look at these one by one. And you may be wondering how come I know so much about contracting. Um, That's because I'm not a lawyer, but I got involved in contracting, and you will be involved in contracting probably also. Why? Because if you're involved in any kind of sales or purchasing, you will be involved in contracting, even though you're not a lawyer. Now, the legal department will support you, but you will have to take the lead on legal contracts. Okay? So as a purchasing manager, it's important for you to know the basics of contracting, even though you don't have to be an expert in contract law. Okay. So, elements of a contract. First of all, um, a contract specifies a term, a time period with a start date and end date during which the agreement will be valid, in effect. Okay? And then you need to think about the renewals. Will this be a one time contract, or will this be a renewable contract? These should be specified also. Okay? Uh, if you don't specify explicitly whether your contract will be renewed or not, then there's ambiguity. Okay. Sometimes the renewal may be automatic, so you could say, okay, this contract will be renewed automatically. So the expiry date will come, the end date. That's fine, but then without you having to do anything, the contract will be renewed because that's what you've written in the contract. Or you could stipulate in the contract saying that this contract can be renewed only with written agreement. At the end of when the end date comes, when the contract expires, then you need written agreement of parties to renew the contract. Okay. What about early termination? So let's suppose your supplier and your company have agreed on a contract, okay, on a purchase agreement. And This is their start date, this is their end date. And something happened. The supplier wants to go out of the contract. Or maybe your company wants to get out of the contract. Okay, it can happen to both parties, either party. So how do you terminate the contract before its end date? Okay, you can also specify conditions for these in the contract. Okay, so this could be an option. You can say either party can get out of this contract at their will, or you can specify this contract will be terminated early in the case of breach of contract or default of either party. Okay. And in those cases, you could specify penalties. Can you get out of a contract just like that with no penalty? Or are you going to pay an early termination fee? Are there going to be other penalties and consequences? So these all can be specified. These all can be specified in the contract. Indemnification. Okay, it's one of my favorite words in the English language, and if you want to impress somebody with big words, indemnification is a good word. So what does indemnification mean? So let's suppose your supplier sells you a product, you purchase a product, okay, and then you use that product to make some other product and you sell it, okay. So the customer sues you, okay, and can you say, well, it's not my fault, it's because of the supplier, okay. So if the supplier wants to protect themselves, they will ask for indemnification clause. In that case, if a customer sues you, you cannot point the finger to the supplier. Okay? So that's indemnification. Okay? It means hold harmless. Okay? So for example, the comedian what's his name? Anyway, I'll talk about that later. So indemnification is very common in contracts. So if one party gets sued, will the other party be also be liable? And nobody wants that. Okay, so if you get sued, but not the other party. Okay. Okay. So for example, Tracy Morgan got hit by a Walmart truck. And then Tracy Morgan sues Walmart. Now, can Walmart turn to the truck manufacturer and say, well, it's not my fault, it's the truck maker's fault? If there's indemnification clause, Walmart cannot turn to the truck maker. Okay, so it's the lawsuit's going to stay between Tracy Morgan and Walmart. This is the meaning of indemnification. Liability is also an important part of a purchasing contract or a sales contract, and you will need to specify what kind of claims can be made by one party against the other party. What kind of losses can be an issue for a claim, okay? Who will pay the legal fees when there's a dispute between buyer and seller, okay? So these liabilities have to be specified. Similarly, you can put a cap, an upper limit on liabilities, and that's a good idea because If there's no upper limit on liabilities, somebody can sue you and take all of your company. Okay. So maximum amount of liability can be specified because another reason for this is a lot of courts will not support unlimited liability. Okay, so it's that therefore it's a good idea to specify maximum amount of liability in a contract. Now warranties. So your seller provides you a product and you buy a product, service, technology, process, whatever from your supplier. Now, are there any guarantees, warranties implied with this purchase? Okay, there may or may not be. Okay, so the Uniform Commercial Code says all purchases have implied warranty, even though the supplier doesn't explicitly give you any warranty. There will be some minimal level of warranty implied with all purchases. Okay. However, it is always a good idea to write down explicitly, okay, what you're expecting from this purchase transaction. For example, it's always a good idea to specify the product. Okay, uh, add a detailed description of the product that you want. Explain how you want the product to function. Okay. Uh, Establish quality expectations, and you want the products to be free of defects, etc. So it's always a good idea to explicitly specify what you expect from a product, service, technology, process, etc. Okay, now this sounds very simple, but this is extremely, extremely important. Okay, who assumes the title? Who assumes the risk? And what are the freight terms? Okay, there a lot of things can happen as the product moves from the supplier's facility to your facility. Okay, let's talk about these. When does the title transfer from the supplier to the buyer? Okay, so so this is very important because so you need to know at every point in time who owns the product. Let's suppose the product is stolen. Who was the owner of the product at the exact moment when the product was stolen? Okay, so when you purchase something, does the title transfer to you immediately? Or do you wait until the product is delivered, until the product is unpacked, until the product is inspected and passes inspection? Do you wait until all of these things to happen before you accept the ownership of the product? Okay, you need to specify at what point in time the ownership will change. The title will go from the supplier to the buyer. Okay. Who pays for freight? Who pays for insurance? Freight has to be insured in most cases because lots of things can happen. Freight could be damaged, stolen, lost, misrouted. Things can happen. And to protect yourself from mishaps, freight risks, you have to buy insurance. But in other, I stand corrected. Products should be insured. But who pays for the insurance? The supplier or the buyer? Customs duties, taxes. Who will pay for these? Who will pay for packaging? Okay. Now, what happens when the product is lost in transit or damaged? Okay. you should specify that in the contract. Okay. Who hires the carrier? Who arranges the transportation? Okay. What mode of transportation is acceptable? Do you want fast delivery, air freight, or are you comfortable with cheap delivery but slow transit times? Okay. So all of these questions are important because they have major cost implications. Okay. Now, payment terms. You go to a store, you hand the cashier a bill or swipe your credit card. But in most B2B commercial transactions, payment terms can vary greatly. There are many, many different options. Okay? And the payment terms are very important in terms of cash flow, in terms of net present value of an investment, in terms of return on investment. Okay. When is payment due? Typically, we assume we receive the product and we pay. In business transactions, this doesn't have to be true. You can receive the product, you can assume the ownership, receive the title, but you don't have to pay immediately. Maybe you'll pay 30 days later, 60 days later, 90 days later. Maybe you're not going to pay everything at once, you'll pay in installments. Okay? Um, so, for example, will you receive discount for early payment? Maybe. What happens if your payment is late? These all have to be specified in the contract. Are you going to pay in cash? Are you going to um, make remittances to a certain bank account? Okay, there are a lot of technicalities here, but but the important thing is they affect your costs and they affect the return on your investment. Okay, force majeure. Okay, force majeure is a situation where you cannot fulfill your contractual obligations, but you have a valid excuse and you cannot be held reliable. There are situations like that, and these have to be specified in the contract. Okay, so uh, you have goodwill, you want to fulfill your contractual obligations, but certain things prevent you, even though you have taken all precautions, and you don't want to be held liable because it's out of your control. Okay, so these are exemptions from liability in the case of extraordinary events. So, what are some examples of force majeure? These could be natural disasters, hurricanes, blizzards, earthquakes, etc. War, riot, all these things. Now, who will declare force majeure? Who will decide when force majeure occurs? And how will the other party be notified? And how will the other party know that it's actually a force majeure? How will the other party verify that this is actually truly a force majeure situation? These should also be specified in a purchasing contract. Now, contracting is the beginning of a business relationship. Okay? I know this sounds horrible, but just like a prenuptial agreement begins a marriage relationship, a purchasing contract starts a business relationship. Okay? So you sign the contract, you're in the business relationship. Okay? But it is not the end of a purchasing manager's work. The purchasing manager cannot say, okay, I found your supplier, I found your product, service, or whatever, here's the contract, go go work with it. Uh, the purchasing manager has to start implementing this contract. What does that mean? Implementation means uh, you will start receiving deliveries, you will start inspecting the products, you'll start evaluating the service, you'll start training if you purchase a new technology, a new process, etc. So all these things come under implementation. You might be thinking, well, what's the big deal about implementing? It's just implementing what is written in the contract. Well, implementation can be challenging because a contract induces change. Okay, so a new contract means you have to work with new materials, you have to use new services, new technology, new processes, and employees might resist that. Okay, so people naturally resist change because they're used to the old. They're used to the way things have been always done in the past. They don't want change. It's uncomfortable. Okay? They're unfamiliar with the new materials. They may feel risky. They may feel scared. Okay? They may be scared for their jobs. Okay? They may feel like their jobs will be eliminated because of a new technology. Okay? Change also requires new learning and effort. Okay? So if you use a new product or a service or a process or a technology, they may have to uh, get out of their routine, learn new skills, learn new information, etc. So it requires some effort. Okay. Change may change the relationships in an organization. If you buy new material, new service, new technology, new product, they may change the, the way the work is done, operations will change, and that will change the relationships people have with each other in a company. And this may reduce some people's status, and that may upset people. This may also uh, uh, increase some people's status. Again, some people may be happy, but some people may be upset. Okay. Change may also feel disrespectful to people. Okay. Change may feel political. Change may feel as if it is motivated by ill will. Okay. So for all these reasons, people may resist to use the new materials that you buy, or people may resist using the new technology that you buy. Okay, so what do? As a purchasing manager, you have this great product or service or technology that you have bought, but the employees are resisting, they're not using it. So how do you implement the contract? How do you make it work when people are resisting the change that you brought in with the contract? Okay. So what people do when they resist change is they may disregard facts. They may say, well, this new product that you said was going to be great is actually garbage. They may badmouth the product. Okay. They may spread rumors and misinformation. They may say, well, this product's supposed to be so, great and wonderful and everything, but they may say it actually causes cancer. And this may be completely false, untrue. but they're just trying to hurt you. They're just trying to stop the change from being implemented. They could sabotage work. So you may receive a perfectly good product. During inspection, employees can, on purpose, break the product and say, oh, you've bought damaged product. They want to sabotage the work. Okay? And they may blame you for failure. They may perform their job poorly and point the finger at you and say, well, I did poorly because of the new material, because of the new technology, because of the new service. Okay? So what do you do as a purchasing manager? Um, Resistance cannot be overcome by logic. Okay? Resistance cannot be overcome by rational means. Why not? Because resistance does not come from the brain. Resistance is an emotional response. It comes from the heart. Okay? So you need to address people's emotions to overcome resistance to change. And how do you do that? You do that by, as the song goes, RESPECT, respect. Okay? So people will stop resisting when they feel they're being respected, when they feel they're being listened to, when they feel they're cared about. Okay? People will stop resisting when they feel they're going to be awarded, appreciated, celebrated. Okay? So when you sign a contract and introduce a change, you need to position this process so that, first of all, the users are involved in important decisions. Now, this doesn't mean that you let them make the final decision, but if you get their input, if you give them enough participation so they will feel respected, they will be less likely to resist. Why? Because now the purchase decision will also be partly their decision. If they're not involved, it's someone else's decision being imposed on them. But if it's their decision, and if they have participated in the decision to sign the contract and use the new materials or service or technology or whatever that is, then they're more likely to embrace the change that comes with the new product, service, technology, process. Okay. In the contract design, get them involved. Get them, even involving them at minor points, minuscule details. Okay, will make them feel appreciated, listened to, valued, and respected. Okay, so when they receive the new material, it's not going to be someone else's material. It's their material. They participated in buying that material. They bought that material to some degree because they helped design the contract. Involve your employees in negotiations. Okay? Again, they don't have to drive the main parts of the negotiations, but just get them involved. Okay? So this way, they will be invested in the success of that contract. Because if they're involved in contract and that contract fails, they will be involved in a failure. When they get involved in a contract, they will feel invested in the contract, and they will want the contract to succeed because they will be appreciated uh, if that contract uh, uh, is a success due to their involvement. But if they're not involved, they don't care whether the contract succeeds or fails because they have no stake in the game. Their involvement in the contract will give them that involvement and that incentive for the contract to succeed. Okay. Okay. So we talked about this. Now, let me tell you something that happened to me as I was working in industry, and I couldn't believe this. It's unbelievable. So we were the supplier, and we were selling a service, and the purchasing agent, the purchasing manager, was signing a contract with us, and they stipulated in their contract that uh, our service price will decrease every year by a certain amount. And I'm like, oh my God. And our company agreed to that. Why? Because we were working with a super buyer. The super buyer was big and powerful. We were a relatively small company and we wanted their business. So we had to agree to lower our price over time. And I couldn't believe this. Prices go up over time. They don't go down over time. But the customer we were working with was so powerful, they could say, okay, you have to become more efficient over time, reduce your costs, and you have to pass on those cost savings to me. So what do you do as a supplier? You do continuous improvement. Okay, this is very important. What does continuous improvement mean? It means being never satisfied, regardless of how well you do your job. Okay, let's suppose you have certain performance criteria, and you do your job, you meet all the criteria, and you may feel like, okay, now I'm going to go home and party. Well, that's not how it works in modern day business. Okay, so what a lot of companies do is they measure their performance, and then they start thinking, okay, we have done well today. How can we do better tomorrow? Okay, and then they do better tomorrow. They increase their performance, and then they start thinking again, okay, how can we do even better the following day? Okay, I bet the vast majority of you will face this kind of attitude at work. This is called continuous improvement. So how do you practically implement this? Okay, so the practical implementation is through performance measurement. Okay, so what is involved in performance measurement? So let's suppose you're a purchasing manager. How do you measure your performance? Okay, so you need to come up with uh, report cards. Okay, so what are these report cards? This is a very generic term. I'm not talking about particular format. So first of all, indicate what is expected of you. Let's say as purchasing manager, uh, your people may expect you to stay within a certain budget limit. Okay, that's your expectation. Do not exceed this amount. Okay, and then you go about your business. And oh, by the way, uh, uh, a lot of times you will have multiple expectations. So, as a purchasing manager, you could have a budget constraint, budget expectation. You could have a quality expectation. You could have an availability or disruption risk expectation. Okay, so you could have multiple expectations, multiple objectives, goals to achieve. And then they should also indicate the relative importance. Okay, what is the most important goal that you have? What is the second most important? What is the third most important, etc. And uh, measure performance through purchasing records. Okay, and then compare the performance to expectations. Okay, did you meet the expectations? Did you exceed the expectations? Did you fall short? And the most important thing is, how can you do better? Now, the thing is, you might have met or exceeded all expectations, but the idea of continuous improvement is you should still try to do better next time. Okay, that's the idea behind continuous improvement. Okay, so what is the benefit of measuring performance? Two adages. Okay, one of them says you can only manage what you can measure. In other words, if you don't measure the performance of your employees, how will you know who is performing well, who's performing not so well, who needs help, who needs guidance? Okay, so you need to measure something before you can manage it. Anything that is measured improves. This is the funniest and the most interesting thing ever. Now, if you tell employees that you're going to measure their performance, they will work better. Now, this measurement may not be tied to any award or penalty or anything. Just simply telling them that you're going to measure them. No bonus pay, no penalties or anything. Just measure. You're going to measure them. That it has been shown that people will perform better just knowing that they are being measured, even though there will be no expectations of bonus rewards, penalties, or anything. So this is a very interesting benefit of performance measurement. Okay. So when you measure performance, what you will be able to do is see and identify inefficiencies. Okay, you will see where you're lacking, where you're falling behind, and that will give you an opportunity to correct those inefficiencies. In addition, performance measurement will give you a chance to reward good performance, okay, to motivate your employees even further, and to help those employees who are struggling or not performing so well. Okay, and in recognizing your employees, it doesn't always have to be monetary. Okay, so performance pay, bonus pay, everybody loves that. But you could have employee of the month, other types of recognition, and public praise and awards as well. Okay, so this concludes this week's presentation. Thanks for watching. Good, good. I'm getting more used to it, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, careful with all the cords.